Hi, and welcome to the Collaborative Divorce Vancouver Ask a Collaborative Professional webinar. Today we have Alyson Jones joining us to educate and provide resources for both professionals and anybody who is contemplating separation and divorce or going through it right now. So I do want to welcome Alyson. She is a registered clinical counselor and a clinical director of Alyson Jones and Associates, where she leads a team of therapists who specialize in separation and divorce issues. Alyson was an adjunct faculty member at the Adler University for several years and is currently involved in professional education for counselors and lawyers. She's a family therapist, parenting coordinator, mediator, collaborative law, divorce coach, and child specialist with over 30 years of experience in the field of individual, couple, and family and child therapy. We're so lucky to have her here today. And I just really hope that whatever words of wisdom you have will provide some support for those listening and bring more people to collaborative divorce as another option for going through this process. So simply put today, I'm going to ask some questions. Alyson's going to give us some answers. So first and foremost, welcome, Alyson.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this webinar series. I think it's a great idea to just have a easy and accessible platform to learn more about this process. So I think it's great.
Yeah. And for anyone listening, we will have a recording available on our website that you can promote to people who you think might benefit from hearing it and for the public at large. So first and foremost, from the words of a counselor, tell me, what is collaborative divorce?
Well, from my perspective, collaborative divorce it's a process that when families are transitioning, there's a variety of different ways and processes that they can access, and collaborative divorce is one of those. And to me, by far, one of the best options out there. But basically, it is a commitment to not go to court. It's a commitment for all the parties that are attached to the process, both the people going through the divorce and separation, the lawyers, and also the mental health professionals and others helping, financials and child specialists. It's a commitment to working out the issues without having to go to court. And I always say, because I've been working in divorce and separation for years, that I've never seen a case where I can actually say confidently, oh yeah, court was good for the kids. When that family went to court, that was good for the kids. I've never seen that, right? So to have a process where there's a commitment to finding resolution and solutions and keeping things focused on preserving the resources of the family, to me, is such a great alternative. And when I say resources, I don't just mean financial resources, although I do mean financial resources as part of it. I also mean mental health resources, energy, family connections, right? Like all those things that we want to assist people in preserving, right? The collaborative process is set up to really attend to that much better than many of the other processes I've ever seen.
Okay, well, that's very well put. So different than what we hear when a lawyer describes it. That's why we like to have different lenses to hear from. You know? So what is the role of a divorce coach within the collaborative divorce process?
Well, for myself, I've operated both as a divorce coach and a child specialist, right? So I've been able to, see through both of those lenses, right? And, for me, I'll just take a step back and then I'll get into that. But for me, way back when I first started doing divorce and separation work, there really weren't there was very little information out there, period. And in fact, when I started working this, we didn't even have collaborative law. And so when this first arrived in Vancouver, I was so excited because I was like, okay, here's an opportunity, because I believe this is not just a legal issue. This is a psychological family dynamic issue too, right? So to be able to have collaborative, divorce where legal and mental health and financials all come together to assist families was such an exciting thing to do. And so, like I said, there's a variety of different roles, but one being the divorce coach, and a divorce coach, kind of traditionally is somebody that might work with one of the parents. And it doesn't mean necessarily they're going to work with them forever. It might be very specific to the divorce, but it helps educate them around the process that they're in, the transition and change that's going on. It actually is there to also, the divorce coach can help them grieve, right? Because if we don't grieve, we stay angry, right? Underneath grief, there's often a lot of anger. So if we can kind of grieve and then let go of some of that anger, people can make much better decisions. So that divorce coach is really there to help with the parent that they're working with, to kind of examine any blocks that might be getting in the way and help and prepare them to come to the table to find resolution to the best way possible. And then the child specialist, and this was one of the most exciting things about this process for me, was when you looked around in the divorce and separation world, there really wasn't any avenue for the like how the needs of the children were going to be attended to. But within this process, there is. The child specialist is somebody who is helping that child also grieve and move through the process. But the great thing is that child specialist is part of the team and can give feedback to the divorce coaches, feedback to the lawyers, feedback to the parents on how the children are doing, what they might need in this process. So from a mental health background, there's two avenues that people can really be of service to families. Like I said, as a divorce coach or as a child specialist, if you have the background and training and, the things working with youth and children. And if you have the background and training and, helping parents through process and grief.
Thank you. Thank you, Alyson. Do you think you could talk a little bit about the impact you've seen of divorce on children and families, and then maybe how this process could provide a better outcome? So sort of two pieces.
Yeah. And it's a big one. I mean, my career has really been about this,
and this is really the magic.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. This is why, for all our listeners, why we do what we do, because we truly believe that this can provide a better outcome for families.
And I really do believe that. And if anybody knows me, they know I'm not a Pollyanna kind of person. I'm not like Erin, like thinking just idealistically what could happen. I'm very grounded in reality. So the fact that there's a process out there that can help us get a better outcome is very important and very relevant for us all to know about, right? And to make sure that the clients that are going through this know about it. So when it comes to divorce and separation, right? I mean, it is a wound. It's going to hurt. It should hurt. And when I say that, sometimes people are like, oh, why should, but it should hurt. Anything that's important to you that you've lost should have an impact on you. If it doesn't, then you're way too detached. And we don't need our children growing up in a detached world. There's already enough things drawing their attention, right? In ways that sometimes aren't what we want for them to be, right? But we don't need a bunch of detached kids. So if it's hurting, that means it was important. So there is a wound that goes with divorce. And parents, I've sat in the office with so many parents, and for some parents, it's really crushing when they have to deliver the bad news to their children, right? Because they're worried how this is going to hurt them and how this is going to impact them. The thing is, if you create space to do that and you acknowledge the real feelings going with it, you give space for people to be authentic and real, and the healing begins then, right? So in the collaborative process, we can guide people with that right from the get-go, right? But the thing that really makes the difference is, even though that is a wound, it is a wound that can heal, right? Like the research shows us that children go through a divorce and separation. Yes, there is a wound, but if it's healed well, this doesn't impair their functioning. In fact, it only elevates risk very little if they've gone through a divorce and separation. The key is the conflict, right? So if we can manage the conflict, if we can have a process in place that brings the conflict down, then we are doing incredible service for those children in their long-term development, because it's the conflict that really hurts children. So our cycle of family goes through divorce and separation, there's loss and grief, but there's processes in place that help them move through this. Communication continues, feelings are felt, movement is made. This impacts the kids. They go forward, they thrive in the world, and they learn how to problem solve themselves with their own relationships, etc., in the future. So there can be a real positive cycle that exists. The negative cycle is when the conflict is so high that there doesn't get to be resolution. And people stay stuck in that. And I've seen people battling it out. I don't even know how many times they've been in court. And I don't know, how many years it's been. Sometimes it's staggering. That is the stuff that hurts kids. So yes, it has an impact, but given an opportunity to heal, right? And I like to think that as mental health professionals, we can be some of those healers in this process. Kids can go forward. And in fact, they can learn real life lessons from this: adaptability, resiliency, problem solving. But if they're not allowed to heal and that wound stays open, and it stays open because the high conflict that continues with their parents, then that's when we get into the tricky and difficult stuff that has some very negative long-term outcomes. So when I look at collaborative process, no doubt to me, this is a better avenue for people to go because it is so much more resolution based.
I'm going to go off script here and talk about what I call the elephant in the room. Okay. So when there's scarcity, adults worry about, that can be the worry, right? So we talk about how the children are involved in the conflict, and then we can talk about the adults in conflict. And when there's scarcity of resources, which is very, very common where we practice in Vancouver, how as a counselor can you support the resolution when the adults can be stuck in a scarcity mindset and more worried about that than the emotional piece?
Yeah. Well, this is where having the team approach, or having like a good, divorce coach in there, right? Because, and the thing is, scarcity, and that's reality, because, we're all living in a very expensive place in the world, and we all have our financial pressures upon us and such. But you put somebody into a divorce situation and their resources start to go this and their costs go this, right? Mm-hmm. So now we're putting people in a real pressure cooker. The thing is, if you stay angry and emotionally fueled, that you want to get revenge, or you want to have your day in court, what that is going to do is just completely tank the resources. So an option like this that actually takes people's resources into consideration is so important. So if you have lawyers who are resolution based, they're not out to fight the fight. They're there to find solutions with this family that can save people so much money. When you have mental health professionals that are trained and understand this world, helping people move through their grief so that they're not just fueled by anger, right? And if you can get a trusting relationship and do that, you can do that in a few sessions. And a few sessions don't cost much compared to what a court action costs, or a hearing, or a 2-hour hearing, right? Mm-hmm. What you can accomplish in helping people accept the changes that are going on in their life. Like I said with the piece before, we can teach children real life skills. We can teach adults real life skills too, about adaptability and resiliency, but we also have to grieve, right? Before we kind of bounce back, we have to kind of have a moment of grief that we're on the ground, right? But if we're still fighting to be heard and understood, that can fuel so much conflict, right? So being able to move through the emotions, being able to move through the process, both legally and psychologically, in a way that you're guided by people that understand this, can save so much money in this process, right? It's quite staggering when you hear what people actually can spend when they go down the court route.
Yeah, we talked about that on our last webinar, and I was quite shocked because the numbers are somewhere, in the $100,000 per person,
Yep. And
and just like all costs are going up, so is that.
oh, and it's escalating and it takes forever, right? Like getting court time and all of those things, it takes so long. So not only is it a slow and painful process, it is an incredibly expensive process. And unfortunately, from my perspective, and this is sad, but when even you say 100,000, like I've heard of a lot worse than that, right? Like
Yeah,
where,
I know I'm being.
yeah, where I'm kind of like, oh my God, I can't believe you just, that's that's all of your children's education that you just spent, right?
Mm,
On what, right? On what?
mm.
Mm.
So yeah, so changing to something a little different. And I know 30 years experience. I know you've been on collaborative files. I know you've been on litigation files too.
Mhm.
Alyson does some work in that area as well as a specialist. Can you give us an example or an experience that you've seen of a different kind of outcome you've seen for a family who divorced collaboratively, like a different experience that you might see that is more common for people when they go through a collaborative separation versus litigation?
Well, this was, I mean, just honestly, this morning I had a session with parents that I'd worked with collaboratively, right? They did their collaborative process and completed it probably 4 years ago, right? But they've stayed connected. But they came in today to talk about their, son was graduating, right? And they wanted to make this a really great experience for him. And they were doing all the right things to do that. So this young man who's graduating and his parents are there celebrating him, and he is not stressed out because
Mm,
his parents are conducting themselves really well. They're really attending to him in that moment. They're celebrating him. So those are the kind of outcomes, whether that be a graduation or a wedding or, anything that, Halloween, right? Where they can, last night at my house, some of our neighbors who'd actually gone through the collaborative process and they're divorced now and they're at my front door last night getting tricks and treats for their kids, and what a wonderful feeling for those children, right? So the fact that you could still have a cohesion in your life and a cohesion, because it's very painful whether you're 8 and trick-or-treating and experiencing your parents' stress and conflict, or whether you're 24 and graduating university and experiencing your parents' conflict. To not have that, that's the kind of outcome that we are aiming for, where this decisions and support can still be given to children of all ages in a way that it doesn't stress them out, right? And so, um, because you're building some goodwill when you're in
mm,
the process, and people both have to compromise. There aren't winners and losers in the
mm,
collaborative process. There's loss. And
mm.
there's probably even some gains, but there's not winners and losers. And when there's winners and losers, like that pain just continues.
I'm going off script again. Uh, um, I have a very memorable experience from when I interviewed you a couple of years ago, when you talked about a philosophy you had about how uh, when families separate, there's an opportunity to create a new family,
Mm.
and it
Mhm.
doesn't have to just be seen as an ending. Can you
Right.
just share that philosophy with our listeners? Because I think it's one of the more positive ways to look at separation and divorce.
And I think it's really important because it is a new family. It's not, we don't want to be looking at people and it as broken families, right? This is a new configuration of a family. If there's parents that, they had children together, like there's still a family for those children. That's still your mother, that's still your father. Are those are both still your fathers, or those are both still your mothers, right? Like this parenting continues. Excuse me. So
Forever.
forever. And so, it's not even just about the resolution and the financial resolution of the house and the RSPs and those things in that moment. It's about building blocks to have a restructured family and what that looks like, where there can still be communication. I mean, it's one of the great loss for young people is if their parents can't communicate with about them anymore, And one of the things I always say to parents is nobody is ever going to find your children as fascinating as you. Even if other people find them fascinating, nobody is going to find them as fascinating as you two. So allow yourself to still be fascinated together when that young man's graduating that I was talking about this morning, right? Like allow yourself to still be the most fascinated people for that young man or your kids trick-or-treating, like because you're robbing yourself if you don't allow that other parent to share some of that fascination too.
Yeah, that is one of the reasons to choose a process
Yes.
that is going to give you a different outcome
Yes, absolutely.
other than conflict,
Yeah.
period.
And there will be, and within the collaborative process, there's going to be conflict. It's a conflictual situation. Like there's a lot of strong feelings, right? But it's contained in a way that is more open about it. Like it's like, we're trying to help people move through their conflict. And we're also trying to teach people how to deal with conflict more appropriately, right? As opposed to, going into the courts and fighting and duking it out and then going back into that winners and losers, right? It's we we will anticipate conflict and the collaborative process can handle conflict, but people do have to be prepared that if they won't come out of that mindset of winning and losing, right? They could take a good thing, the collaborative process, and they could make it a bad thing if they're going to try to turn it into the same form for that level of conflict.
Well, I think that's why it's so important to have a divorce coach, which is a counselor. We call them divorce coaches in collaborative process, because they can identify when that style of behavior is there, and it's not purposeful. I often think it's unconscious and protective for the people that are in it, right? So you need a really good therapist to be able to help that person dig themselves out of that hole, because it's their own grief, and there's reasons for it. They're not trying to be a winner or a loser, necessarily.
No, there's
they
good.
can't see. Yeah, they can't see themselves in it. So based on that, like what, and I always want to talk to the skeptics. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
And the skeptics always think, well, I want my day in court, right? That's got to be the fairest place to go. That's the only way I'm going to know I got what I deserved. Okay. What families are the best fit for a collaborative process, and what families should avoid? And are there risks to this process?
Well, there can be risks if you're not coming with the intention to look for resolution, right? Like you can waste some time and some resources. If you're coming with the goodwill of, okay, I want to settle this and I'm willing to, make some compromises, but if you think you shouldn't have to compromise anything, then that's probably you're going to lead to more court actions. But the thing about that is, when people want their day in court, and I've been in court a lot, so I know this world, right? But is that, it isn't that what it is a statement that you couldn't make a decision. That's what it is, And so but for me, and I don't mean to sound harsh, but that's a fail. Right? Like to me, that's not a win. Like you couldn't make a decision. Like maybe you couldn't make a decision because you had a partner who wouldn't make it, right? And X whatnot. That could happen because I've seen people who did not want to have to go to court because there was no other way to get a decision. But that's what a judge does for you. Is it the right decision? Well, they don't love your kids, right? And they're just pulling on the law to the best of their ability, and they're just human beings. So, is our system flawed? For sure, because people are operating in it. Doesn't mean they're bad people. There's a lot of really good, well-intentioned people trying to do their best to serve these families. And I have a lot of compassion for the judges, especially in family law matters, because they're so convoluted, right? And a lot of these people don't have training in, developmental psychology or what children need. That's the other thing with the collaborative process, though, is you're dealing with people that are trained in what people need or what your children might need. So I think the collaborative process can handle a lot of cases, and it can handle complex cases, but there has to be reality checks. You can't come into it thinking you're just going to be able to push your agenda, right? You've got to be willing to kind of look at it and look at the bigger picture of how you can preserve resources for your family. So if you're just looking for a fight, which is sad, but like I said, it can handle conflict and help you, assist you, in fact, much more effectively in resolving conflict. But if you won't look at any other considerations, then it's probably not a great process for you. Right? You've got to have some ability to look at yourself and have some goals of resolution.
Well, and I like to remind couples that are separating and divorcing that they only have one option, which is that they do have to come to a separation agreement. Like, that's, if you're separating, you have to come to an agreement.
Right.
So you get to choose how you go about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of the purpose of these webinars, is for people to understand that they have a choice on how they come together to agree on their separation and divorce agreement.
And I know that I would much rather have that input myself, like I said, other than handing it off to the courts when you can't make a decision, and then the court making the decision, which might be very, very far from what you think it should be, right? You have a lot more ability to impact the outcome if you're at the table as one of the shareholders, one of the stakeholders of that outcome.
Yeah, I hope that our listeners are hearing this. So
too.
well, it's going to be available. We will be promoting this, for people to see, because we really truly have that belief that, through our experience, that we see a better way to help families. So when and how does a family find and hire a divorce coach?
Well, I mean, it's, first of all, just having sort of public education like this and opportunities so people even know of their existence is great, right? Often it's going to come through, people might be through their lawyers, right? Where they're contemplating divorce or they're obtaining a lawyer going through, and then they hear more about the collaborative process. And those lawyers will often have people that they know are trained and can refer to. We have a website we can, direct people to that kind of explains the different processes, like explains the different roles and the people that have been trained in it and that are on the roster for it. So, but another way too, like in my world, is if you're working with families and sometimes the family is under pressure, often they'll come into counseling because things are starting to come a bit apart at the seams. And then maybe it comes up that they are contemplating or the relationship is in trouble in one way. And if they do decide to separate, as a therapist, you too can direct people towards the collaborative process and coaching, even if you don't do it yourself. You can kind of connect them with this process or educate them or reference them to the website or let them know who you think is a really good divorce coach working in the process, right? But I can say confidently when I look at the website for Collaborative Divorce Vancouver, because I know most of the people on it, and they're all great, and they all are people who really want to do this and assist this in being done better.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Um, so everybody always likes to know, what does it cost? It's a
Yeah.
reality. So what would a family expect to spend on counseling fees in a collaborative process?
Well, yeah, it's such a hard one because each case is so different, right? I mean, if you are really already ready for change and, you've already done some processing, you can move things quite quickly, right? And I don't mean so quickly that it's alarming, but so it really depends on your level of readiness and where you are in your process and the grieving process, right? Because sometimes one party has to catch up to the other, especially if one party is the one that said, you know, I want to get the divorce and the other one hasn't, right? Often it'll take more time in that circumstance to help move this person so that they both can be in a more emotionally ready place to negotiate and figure things out, right? So, I mean, it's so hard to say, but you know, and the rates can vary a little bit too. But I mean, even 10 sessions can help considerably. And to
Mm.
me, in comparison to what you're paying for maybe 10 hours of legal work, 10 hours of therapeutic work could make a big difference. And for your children, if you bring a child specialist on, which I highly recommend because it's a very safe way for the children to be taken into consideration in the process. They're not put in the middle of it. They still are protected because they have that child specialist speaking, often for them to the team. To me, that's an investment in your kid's mental health, right? And if they get a good working relationship with that therapist, to me, yeah, it's gonna cost, but the benefit of it is gonna be huge, right? If your child is going into the world with a strong toolkit for success. But again, it's hard with kids to know. It could take longer to establish rapport with kids, or it could happen fairly quickly. But to me, I would be really encouraging people to look at least investing and being open to invest in maybe 10 sessions with a coach or 10 sessions for, that child specialist to work with your kid to help them further along their own acceptance in this process too.
Mm. We haven't talked a lot about the child specialist and their role or their impact on children. So I just have one other question after, but I'm gonna throw this one in because I think it's really important. Uh, Tell me what impact you think having counseling with your children through a child specialist or therapist has on those children going through separation and divorce. And
Well,
at what age, and does age matter? I mean, are they teenagers? Are they
yeah,
children?
great question. Great question. And one that I can speak to from vast experience, right? Is I have no doubt in the value of that because I've been so honored and privileged to be able to be that person in many families' processes, right? And it has incredible benefit to the children in the sense that it's like, if our child was wounded and broke a bone, we would take them to emergency and they would be treated, right? They would get the cast, they would do all the things that needed to be done. We would have the follow-up care. It's the same thing when there's a wound in the family like this. I believe strongly it needs to be treated, right? And I believe it needs to be treated at whatever age this is occurring. Now, if it's an infant, I mean, the infant's not going to benefit from counseling, but they're going to benefit from their parents working with divorce coaches. But once a child is 5, 6 years old, their prefrontal cortex is there. They can understand grief, loss, love, all of those things. And
Mm,
so having somebody in a safe place to process that with is
mm,
huge, right? It's a huge thing. And can be and in fact, kids, we know kids given appropriate treatment, even like with the broken bone, heal quicker. The younger
mm,
we are, the quicker we heal, right?
mm,
So if we're given appropriate support at that time, we can heal very quickly. Kids can respond and adapt very quickly if they're given the right treatment for the wound, right? If a kid is going through this and they're 14, right? It's a different developmental stage, but it's still important to treat it at that time. They might not heal quite as quickly as the, 6-year-old, but they could, it's not something you want to put off and be dealing with in their 30s, right? So, it's not just because I do this work that I believe in it, it's because I believe in it that I do this work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I really believe this makes a positive impact. And, kids are the most vulnerable in this situation. So if there is a process in place that protects that, helps them, then to me, I'm like, that's 100% for sure what I feel should happen. And it doesn't mean there's something wrong with your kid and they have to go to counseling forever and ever and ever, right? It's just like if you broke your arm, it doesn't mean you get treated for the broken arm forever and ever, right? It heals eventually. And you might even have a little scar if you had to have surgery, right? But it becomes part of you and part of your story. But it doesn't mean that you're constantly treating it. So parents don't have to worry that, oh, if we start going to counseling, it's going to happen forever. It's only going to happen for when it's needed.
A great analogy. Thank you, Alyson.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to leave you with one last question. What advice would you give your best friend or your sister who was separating?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I've certainly had this in my life, people I love, right, have gone through divorces and separation. And I try to be that friend, that like, of course, is there, helping a shoulder to lean on and stuff. But I can't help myself, right? I also really try to encourage them to look at processes that are going to best preserve the resources in their lives, right? So, I really do try to connect them with a good lawyer who I think understands collaborative process, or good financial advisor who can help them understand how to preserve their hard-earned resources to the best possible way, or to a good therapist that can help them with their own coaching, or child specialist for their children. And I just try to help them understand, much like I was saying, that this is a hard time, and it is a wound, but it's a wound that can heal. Right. And we just have to have the right environment around that. So when it's people you know and love, of course you're supporting them, but I'm just who I am. I can't just stand by and see if I think they're going down a destructive path. I'm going to say there are other ways to go here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Much better ways. So I'm going to map those out. I can't make people do them, but boy, they're still going to know about them if they cross my path.
That's more wisdom coming from Alyson. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here with us today as well. I'm just going to check the chat room. We do really try to have confidentiality in these webinars. So it's more of a listening than a participation due to the subject matter, as you can imagine. Right. But if anybody would like to, you're welcome to put a question into the chat, and Alyson and I'll just hang on for that. And while we wait to see if anybody has any questions, I just want to tell people how they can find you, Alyson. So it's Alyson Jones and Associates, and your website is
Alyson Jones and Associates, right? .ca.
Yeah. And so you can see her name here in the corner, in the Alyson Jones.
If you Google, you will find it. It will come up, right? And we have admin too, so people are welcome to inquire. And we can certainly guide them into what's the best plan for them. So so we can easily find me on the web, and it'll have all the contact information there. I do notice there is one question, and I'm just going to read out the question. What should we do if our teenager refuses to go to a child specialist to help them in the divorce process? Right. And which is a good question, right? Because not every teenager is jumping up and down going, I really want to go to counseling. Although it does happen occasionally and you're like, wow, that's exciting. Right. Because first of all, remember, mental health conversation has changed a lot in the last few years. A lot more teenagers and kids are way more open to mental health support. than they were pre-pandemic, right? We've had conversations. In fact, more and more young people are having those conversations with each other. But what I would say in that sense is, I would explain to the young person, your input is important, and you can just go and check this out and see how you feel with this person, right? Like, at least you have an opportunity to just sort of let them know, right? Because they're going to be working with the team like that is, that we're trying to find resolution on. So, really encourage them, even if it's to come for one time. And my experience has been, and I've been very fortunate, is a lot of those kids that came for the one time, we had a good connection, and they were like, actually, I think I'd like to come back and talk to you again. So let the therapist do their job. You don't have to do their job. Your job is just even to get them there for that one time and let them know that their voice really matters, and that this is a way to have them heard, right, in the process. If it isn't the right time, or the child specialist thinks this isn't going to be helpful, at least they've tried, right? And so, in the same way that you might have to take a young person to a medical appointment or a dental appointment that they don't want to go to, sometimes we have to use the same techniques to kind of say, it's part of my job as your parent to take care of you and to have a check-in and make sure things are okay, right? And so this is part of what what our expectation is, that you go and attend.
Yeah, thank you, Alyson. I don't see anything else popping up here, but I'm sure we'll have you back again. You're always a very popular guest. Alyson's often on Global News and CBC and all sorts of great stuff. So we're very lucky to have her, and very lucky to have her in our collaborative community. So again, thank you very much. And this webinar will be recorded and available on our website. And we'll also have some of the questions separated for smaller videos. So thanks very much for coming, Alyson, and we'll see you soon at one of the meetings.
That sounds great. And thank you for the participants who joined us, and for any that should watch on the recording. Thank you for your time. It is appreciated.
Okay. Thanks so much. Okay. Bye.